Good evening. Welcome. I'm used to saying good morning from this film, but good evening. I'm Reverend Cantor. I'm senior minister here at the church. We welcome you all to this screening of this important film, and we really are looking forward to some robust engagement with the pastor who's featured in this film and the filmmaker and some others who were here, and they went to get something to eat because they said they've seen this film about 14,000 times. So it's just us, and we are pleased to have this film. We're actually going to have two screenings of the film because it's going to be up there and up there. And that's just how it is in this sanctuary. So find your comfortable spot. We, as First Unitarian Church, have been committed to working on racial justice for a long time. We say that we are one of the first churches in Dallas who integrated. That was back right around 1945. This church worked on school integration and has been working on many of the issues that have come through Dallas and affect all our lives around justice, compassion, peace, violence. And we say that being part of this church, we ask people to become more generous, more compassionate, and more of service in the world. And so those values guide us. We also have been in conversation with Reverend Parish, who is here with his wife, from Truly Missionary Baptist Church, and some of your members are here. We were at their house 2 weeks ago for a conversation with them about a shooting that took place by a Dallas police officer of a member of their community. And so we welcome you here. This may be a little piece of the next step of our conversation and our commitment to stand with you and see how we all can make our city a better place to live for all people. So we welcome you. And we also thank the Embry Foundation. Lauren is here in the back, and Lauren asked us to screen this film many months ago, and so we're really happy to be partnered with Dallas Faces Race and the Embry Foundation and the good work they are doing to bring about conversations around race and compassion and bias and how it affects our lives. So we welcome you here this evening on this important moment, and especially with the recent gun violence we've seen in our community and in our nation. We might say we show this today for the people of Portland and the Umpqua Community College, as they have been the most recent victims of senseless gun violence in our nation. So if we can end that violence, we will have accomplished a great deal. If we can just find some compassion in our hearts for each other, we will have accomplished a great deal. If we can just see each other with loving eyes, we will have accomplished something great. And so that's what work we are about. So I want to invite forward my colleague, Reverend White, to offer us a prayer at this moment.
Before we enter in the moment with the movie, if you'll join me in prayer, please. God of many names, we give thanks for this life and this day, the opportunity to be here in this house, gathered with good friends and new friends as we seek to build a better world. We ask that in this place we have eyes to see and ears to hear, wisdom, courage, and compassion for issues like these and all those who face the effects of violence. Let us have the courage to act and do our part to repair the broken parts of the world, to bring your spirit of justice and compassion through us wherever we go, to build a more just and loving world. We give thanks for all those who are here. We give thanks for this beautiful day, this opportunity to give thanks at all and be awake, to live and love and have the courage that it will take to give our lives as a blessing to all the world. God of life and love, Spirit of compassion, be with us tonight. We give thanks for all of this life together. Amen. Let's begin the film. Well, I'll speak for everyone here in offering my thanks to all of you, so that you know who we're. If you're paying attention to the film, you'll recognize some of the folks here with us. But the director of the film, Abigail Disney, is here with us. As well as Reverend Schenk. Thank you very much. And Lucy McBath. Thank you. They are gracious enough to give us a few more moments of their time for a question and answer period and some conversation between them and us. And I wanted to start off by asking you a couple of questions that I had watching the film in my home and then here tonight, and then maybe getting some from the audience, if that's okay. Well, first of all, Reverend Schenk, you mentioned the danger of being caught being in liberal land as part of your job, and I want to be the first to welcome you there tonight to our congregation. But the reason that I place that as the context for this is that I imagine that in this work you've come across some surprising allies. And this is a place where I know a lot of the people who are gathered here, and we can fall as easily into our own ideological camps in this congregation and in this faith tradition as in any other. But we find these areas of common ground, and I was curious to ask all of you if, having been on this journey of this film, if there are people that you never expected that would be a part of this work with you. And if you can say their names so that we can record them. But yes, if there's any surprising allies, we'd love to know.
I have. In fact, you saw the scene where I'm addressing the Evangelical Church Alliance. And it was a pretty rough go there. There were some very tense moments. I wasn't sure I would be reelected as chairman. I was, and that surprised me. And it was unanimous, so that was shocking, actually. But there were a couple of people that surfaced. One who told me he had quite an arsenal at home and had been stockpiling ammunition. And he said, you know, for the first time, I'm really thinking about this. You really have me thinking about this. And I later saw him, months later, and he said, I think you've changed my heart and my mind on this. And that was very encouraging. Thank God. And then a retired ATF agent who had gone into ministry late in life came to me and said, you know, I have had this in my heart for so long, this deep concern. And he said, I want you to know I'm your friend in this, and I will join you in this, and he has. So there have been some surprises, and I know that's true of Abby and Lucy too. I think you've seen some surprising things. So it starts small, like a mustard seed, but hopefully it'll grow.
Lucy?
As I've always said, being a minority, I always understood and knew there were many, many people out there that felt such as, the pastors and individuals that Rob had been working with. But it was just very disheartening to actually come face to face with them and to have discussions, open discussions with them. And across the country, this is now what I do with my life. I talk to the faith community. I talk to legislators and civic leaders and educators, and I talk to people across the country about this very thing. But it's very, very interesting, the language that we have to use really seems to make the difference in changing people's hearts and minds, because it's not about controlling anyone. It's not about gun control. It's about preserving human life, the sanctity of human life. It's about saving lives and making sure that individuals' Second Amendment rights are not infringed upon, but there are some common sense measures put in place so that we can preserve God's children, the lives of God's children. And when you start to talk to people that way, you can see, I see a light bulb going off in their heads, like, wow, I guess I never really thought about it that way. So yes, there is a conversion that begins to happen, and it's a slow conversion because it's one person at a time. It's one mindset at a time. So in doing the work that we're doing, it will be years. It will be a very, very long time before, most of society agrees with us, and most of society may never agree with us. But we do know that it is a moral and faith conversion, and anytime you try to change a culture, we've changed culture with gay and lesbian rights, we've, the tobacco industry, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, we've been able to change those cultures, but it's taken a long time. So yes, we are changing hearts and minds. We see that every day. And we're going to be depending on you to help us change those hearts and minds.
Maybe I'll just add an afterthought here, and that is that as surprising as some of the allies have been, and they're in my own organization, I expected almost a resignation en masse of my board for my apostasy on this. But that didn't happen, and that was delightfully surprising. But equally surprising has been how disappointed I've been with some of the people I expected to be my allies, and in fact are not. And so it's been quite a roller coaster ride, and we're just getting underway.
I know this is the part where the car goes up to the top, and you're like, la la. Yeah, for one, this is a surprising ally sitting right next to me. I mean, I never expected to talk to a person like Rob, much less work with him and like him, which is weirdness. But I have to say, just as a kind of smug liberal in Manhattan, I was welcomed into every place we went to, even if the conversation got a little rough. And I was very frank in every space we walked into. Rob can attest to that. I don't agree with anything you think, but I promise not to disrespect you. And everybody signed the release right out of the gate. Everybody offered me the yummiest sausage and bacon sandwiches, and the food is awesome over there in conservative land. And I know, we're just too much kale over here, you guys. I think that we all get a little comfortable with ourselves and a little too snug with the fact that we're all just so nice to each other, and that's a bit of a myth, and that it's what prevents us, right, from going into. I mean, Rob was apprehensive about coming in here. Everybody's under the impression that there are monsters at the end of the map there, and they're not.
My next question before I want to open it up to the group here is that you drew a divide between the way that, particularly, I mean, at least the way the film portrays it, the way that black Christian churches and predominantly white Christian churches were approaching this issue. And I mean, you yourself said that the racial component in this issue was impossible to ignore. And Ms. McBath, I remember watching your son's case on the news in the midst of issues around Trayvon Martin and I'm wondering if there has been any hope in that you've seen in this work, specifically around the issue of racial justice and violence while you've been doing this.
It's very interesting you should even ask that, because I have always said to Abby and Rob that within my community you will find the help that you need. I knew very early on that it would not be an issue or a problem with the minority churches and minority communities, because they would understand very early on that what we're doing is definitely going to make a dramatic difference in just what we see happening in the country in minority communities with gun violence and implicit bias. I think it's going to be a little bit harder sell to the white community, conservative communities. And oftentimes I've even said to them, I wonder how I will be received when I travel with them. You know, if we, you know, are posed with a pastor that's never seen the film, the first thing I'm thinking when I'm sitting there with them is like, well, he's looking at me like, why is she here? You know, so, and I don't get that feeling when I go to the minority churches, the minority communities, because I think they know that I'm bringing them here because they're going to help us to do what we need to do. So it's just kind of a different experience. I think each of us is learning, you know, really continuing to learn about each other and each other's upbringing and the way that we think and our opinions and ideas about race. And we all think the same thing about guns and gun violence, but really on different levels, understanding uniquely how we're so different, but very much the same.
One of my regrets in the film is that we weren't able to establish that church we went into in Baltimore, the black church that we went into, is as conservative as it gets, right? This is a Ben Carson, pro-life, very out there conservative church. So when you find that kind of racial unanimity around an issue, I mean, every culture should say, okay, time out. This is a red alert. You know, when you have everybody of this description thinking X and everybody of this description thinking Y, there's a problem. The NRA has been very conscientiously trying to expand its appeal to black people for years, and to women. Those are the two communities it's very sensitive about. If you paid attention to the NRA footage there at the conference, you know, you see security guards, they're people of color, and that is a totally white thing. And you see a lot of women with their husbands, and it's probably more than 25% women there, but as members, they've never risen above 15% female, no matter how many times they've tried, and African Americans represent just an infant. This is a really important difference. This is a really important difference, and if you think race is not in the mix, you just look at the makeup of the NRA, you pay attention to the amount of money they've spent trying to break that up, and you know that there's a reason for that resistance, and it's obvious. You know, the people paying for this problem, the people paying for the policies, all have brown skin. And the people who have most reason to pick up a weapon in self-defense and don't have brown skin. So they have done the analysis, they have recognized that it's a greater risk than a reward to buy this theory that a gun makes you safer. And women are basically in the same place. I mean, guns make women much more under threat in every circumstance, no matter how they're deployed, no matter who's owning them. So that's why we need to, as a culture, start listening to these differences and these lines that divide opinion on racial grounds, because they tell us a lot about what we're not hearing.
Thank you. Do we have a couple of questions? I saw a hand go up here.
Yes, I was wondering what kind of blowback you have experienced directed at you by the NRA.
So the question is, has there been any specific blowback from the NRA on this issue?
So far, nothing overt. And we're I'm steeling myself for that, kind of bracing myself for that. I have talked to 2 NRA board members, just privately. And
One whose name is Grover Norquist.
I didn't say that. Quote, Abigail Disney. And so I would certainly expect that. As far as NRA members within my universe, I tend to hear more from them than non-members. So as of this moment, but we're just rolling out. I mean, really, this is only becoming publicly known now.
I will say that we had last week 2 white evangelical ministers pull out of conversations that they had confirmed, that were on the books, that we were going to have talk about the last minute, within the last half hour of those meetings taking place. So I'm pretty convinced, and we know the NRA playbook is basically to work quietly first, and they go for your supporters, they go for your money, and if it doesn't work, then they come public for you. So our wish, frankly, right now is to raise the profile of the film enough that we smoke them out and they go public, because I'd rather have them publicly coming for me. That only helps us. They'll only look bad.
Question? Let's see. I saw a hand go back here. Yes, and then we'll go right here. Yes.
Thank you all. I had a couple observations.
So the observation being that in 47 years, I think is the number that you used, rhetoric hasn't shifted all too much, and that weapon over gun.
Yeah, and
The hijacking of the Second Amendment by the NRA doesn't get challenged.
right. Well, let me just say that the difference between the NRA then and now is that was more rhetoric than actual ideology, and that in fact, as late as 1968, that handgun bill was co-crafted with help with the NRA, from the NRA after the Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were shot. So there was, on their part, a recognition that history was moving against them. There was a proliferation of very inexpensive handguns into cities, and the murder rate was rising, and people were afraid. And the reaction to that was, okay, well, let's work with the government and do something sensible here. They were always resistant, but they weren't quite the iron-willed demons that they are today. It's a conscious use of the word. There was a shift in the 70s, and the timing of that is really important, because the inside of the NRA board, because of the work on the 1968 handgun bill, tensions started to rise, and factions started to form around this purist view of the Second Amendment and the idea that it was best to work with the government, to pay attention to the clay pigeons and the hunting and the marksmanship, and to become less of an advocacy organization. And that faction was dominant until 1977, when they were getting ready to move out of Washington. They were going to move their headquarters to Washington. And literally in one night at one board meeting in Cincinnati in 1977, the entire board was swept out. New leadership came to power. Actually, Harlan Carter, the guy who ran it for the next few years, was from Texas. He had killed a 17-year-old Mexican boy when he was 19 and was let off without a hearing, and then ran the Border Patrol during the Bracero program, if any of you remember that blot on our history. So he was a no-nonsense, hardcore guy, and he really gave the NRA the new direction it has. So when Lucy says that the NRA isn't the same NRA as 40 years ago, she really means that. There was a shift. And that Second Amendment interpretation was new. That Second Amendment interpretation came from Malcolm X and Bobby Seale. I'm not joking. They were the ones who said, wait a minute, the Second Amendment gives me the authority to protect myself from my own government. And they're the ones who brought out the shotguns in Oakland, and they're the ones who went to the state capitol with shotguns and triggered, I know it's hard not to use these metaphors, Ronald Reagan to enact a very onerous gun control bill. Ronald Reagan, who publicly said there's no reason a reasonable person should be walking down the street with a shotgun in 1972, I think it was. So there's been just enormous change and evolution. The Second Amendment interpretation that we now hear spoken about as though it were gospel is relatively new, and it really solidified in the 90s with the militia movements. And the death of the Soviet Union, when all of that commie-baiting energy sort of turned inward in this country, and those two things kind of came together in a perfect storm. And the hatred for the Clintons, those things came together in a perfect storm around the idea that, there was this Second Amendment right to rise up against your own government, which is nonsense.
Maybe I'll just say something about the terminology, because I did do that very consciously, because people forget that this is lethal force. It is a weapon used to kill. And I've stressed that now, and it does seem to be getting traction. It does seem to kind of reset people's idea about what they're contemplating. So it is the power of words, and thank you for noticing that.
We've got, it's getting on 8:30, so I'll say like 3 more questions. I saw here, and then we've got 2 hands that I saw come up here. Yes, absolutely. Yep. So we'll take your question, and then I saw 2 hands. Thank you.
Abby, at what moment or event did it say you have to make this film?
Well, I think I said I had to make this film about 50 films on the way to this film, because it's been in a lot of different films on the way. But I was raised in a very conservative family, was famously conservative, and we were no kidding conservative, serious business. And the fight I had with my mother, generally speaking, when I got more progressive was, I'm not doing what I'm doing because I hate the values you taught me. I'm doing them because I cherish the values you taught me. This feels to me like enacting those values. And it was really hard thing. As I watched the NRA work, and I watched the way they were really eroding the notion of the kind of America I think I live in, I really thought these are not conservative values as I was taught them. These are radical values. They're espousing a society in which everyone is armed, where people are polite to each other because they don't know if they're going to get killed in a minute, where you don't respect the value of human life, you don't love your neighbor, you don't love your enemy, you don't turn the other cheek, you'd rather shoot than lose your car stereo or your wallet. You don't respect people in uniform, you don't respect history. Every value I was taught in my conservative household is upended, really, in fact, in practice by what the NRA is espousing. So that was kind of the beginnings of the thinking. I mean, at my heart, what I wanted to do was not make a film that just spoke to liberals, so I'm sorry to be terribly disappointed to be talking to you now, but no offense. But, I really, really want us to speak to people who don't already agree with us. And I wanted to find a language that would be welcome, and I knew my name was welcome in conservative circles, and I knew that would be a wonderful resource for me. And I also had always wondered why pro-life language was so... It's powerful. It's rooted in people's genuinely deeply held beliefs. These are not people who are just trying to make my life hard because I'm a girl. They really believe this about human life. So if anybody is acting in good faith over there in pro-choice town, then surely somebody is wondering why it would make my day to put a bullet in someone's head. Surely someone has wondered about that. So I had ideas for a long time. My husband and I had agreed I wouldn't make my NRA film until the last of our kids left for college. I still have one at home. Because of Sandy Hook, I decided to move into action. I just couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. It was too awful.
believe the hands that I saw were of Reverend Parish and Reverend Parish. So.
I have a comment and a question. I don't know if you guys have kept up with the open carry laws here in Texas.
Oh my God.
And my comment is, once the view on who's carrying those guns openly changes, then the law will change back to where it should be here in Texas. And unfortunately, that's going to create some problems. But I believe that's what's going to happen. And I believe the reason why you can't get the audience that you want to get, because here in Texas, we have mega church people. Yeah. And very evangelical, very conservative. And a lot of pastors love floating in the middle on all these issues and don't have to take a stand on anything because they got 10,000 people in their church or 20,000 people in their church. And they get paid very well not to take a stand on anything. Yeah. And so I firmly believe that there's a very deep racial demagoguery going on. And I believe that, and so I guess my question is, I'm sorry, let me get my question. I guess my question is, and really this is a plea, not a question that I think about. Some of these televangelists who call out our metroplex home, I really want you to turn the heat up on them. Because our church is in South Dallas, so we deal with gun violence and the repercussions of gun violence daily. But in mega churchville, they don't have to deal with that. But at your level, you can put pressure on them because they can ignore us, me and my father. But they can't ignore the national kind of push that you and pressure that you can put on them. And really, our pastors, we've got to quit being cowards and actually be pastors. So it's just a plea from me to you that you keep doing what you're doing and you apply pressure on these mega church guys that just collect the checks. So I'm sorry for the question.
Okay. First of all, you're both Reverend Parish? Are you? Okay, I figured. Well, first of all, there are two of you and your names are redundant. So awesome. Did you notice in Ferguson at the end of the summer, the Oath Keepers showed up? Do you remember that? Do you know why that fell apart? Because one guy in the Oath Keepers said, well, you know what would be very logical if we gave the protesters weapons if they carried weapons. And everybody said, okay, that's it, we go home now. It was pretty astonishing how quickly that fell apart as soon as somebody made a very rational observation that the people who were most under threat should maybe be carrying the weapons given their rhetoric. So, yeah, this is so brazenly irrational because it's all about who's carrying the weapon, and it's so brazenly racial. And I'm noticing that the bigger the congregation, the bigger the chicken, I think. So, yeah, I mean, but you know what? History moves forward according to logic, and then once in a while somebody either terribly evil or terribly good does something that you couldn't have predicted, right? Somebody steps up and acts out of conscience. And that's really all we're trying to do with this film, is to slice through the usual with an appeal to conscience. So we do plan to turn up the heat on these people, and I really am hoping that people will see this and turn up the heat on their own pastors and ask for better from their own pastors. They're not leading, you know, and we need leadership.
Preach it, sister.
Reverend Parish, a final question.
My question would be redundant because you've answered it several times, but I would like to make this observation. This whole movement is driven by fear and prejudice. And until we can effectively deal with those two elements, it's really going to always be a problem. Obviously, as you pointed out, most of the audiences were lily white. And I think somewhere along the line, it seems like there's a whisper campaign that the majority will one day be the minority. And so all of the laws and things of this nature are being skewed and distorted because I'm afraid of what's going to once I become a minority. So I've got to get all of the laws and everything in my favor so I can protect myself. And they completely distort what was intended with the Second Amendment. This is not for us to take up arms against the government. They've turned that into a way that I can just stand my ground and own a gun and just shoot and kill anybody that I feel like is threatening me. So I agree with my son that we should, first of all, let me commend you for the wonderful work. Excellent start to have these conversations so that we can dispel some of the fear and hopefully eliminate some of the prejudice. And then once we do that, then I think that we'll begin to see a change.
And let me just, I mean, I have spent my adult activist life in the women's movement for the most part, and you know, we marched and we took back the night and we passed the stupid domestic violence bills and whatever, and, you know, and the men are still raping and they're still, you know, and what we now are saying in our spaces is, men, stop raping, and it's not enough for you not to be a rapist, right? Go tell your brother not to be a rapist. And when you're at the bachelor party, you know, and the stripper walks in, you leave. You know, there's some basic things. Don't go see the stupid hangover movies. And, you know, there's stuff that you can do and be. And race dynamics in this country. Black people have marched and they've taken back the night and they passed the laws and they had a civil rights movement. And, you know, I just told Lucy tonight about, like, a hideous thing my mother said when I was growing up, because I was raised in a crazy racist household, and I feel incredible shame about that. Shame about the things I didn't say, shame about the things I didn't push back on. None of this is going to change until we white people take this on. This is our fight. This is our problem. And we need to push back on our families, and that will be at risk to ourselves and our comfort, and our Thanksgiving dinners. But we need to push back on the joke that's vaguely racist. We need to not go to the film that's objectionable. We need to not give money to people who make money off of racism until we alter white spaces. It will never change publicly in this country. So, you know, I want you to know that, like, I want to do what I can in my world to change my people, because I understand that that has been the great unkept promise and undone work. And then I'll just sound like, 1 second, I'll sound like just a producer for a second and say, this film opens theatrically on October the 30th at the Mesquite, AMC, whatever, and there's a website, and we're on Facebook and Twitter and all of that. Please bring your people to our film. Please get them out. The ticket you buy is a vote for the kind of place you want to live in. So deliver the voters.
24 screen nationwide, and then one more second.
I'm not telling you to wait for the television broadcast, but it will be on PBS in May, and it'll be part of an entire 3 hours of prime time. We're going to get an hour and a half of the film and an hour and a half of live town hall.
And also in conjunction with Abby says about, you know, white communities, white individuals needing to change their mindsets and to do something about what they see happening in the country. That also goes for my people in my community as well, because I spend a lot of time telling them when I do talk around the country, you know, yes, there will be help from the outside. Yes, we will receive help from those that don't look like us, think like us, act like us, but no one can really stimulate most of the change in terms of what needs to be done with implicit bias and the gun violence in this country if we don't do it ourselves. And I spend a lot of time talking to minority communities about the fact that we have to use our God-given voice. We have to push our people to the polls to vote, to begin voting out of office those legislators that are creating these kinds of heinous crimes that disproportionately affect my communities. And then also too, when I do talk to the legislators and I say to them, you know, I I can spout the statistics and I can talk to them and I can try to reason, but the first thing they say to me every time is, okay, then all the people that think and feel like you, where are they? So that is the white community that goes to the legislators. That is the white community that goes to the civic leaders. That is the white community that goes to the town hall meetings. Very rarely is it my people that I see when I'm up there pounding on the legislators' doors and making my rounds. Very rarely do I see my people. So it's just as much, even more, our responsibility to really begin to create and stimulate the change that we need so that we, particularly Black lives, but all lives, can live free from, gun violence and the fear of being gunned down in just any space these days. So I just wanted to say that in conjunction to what Abby said.
Well, we're saying turn out our people. My people seem to be at the center of this problem in a peculiar way, so I'm going to work very hard on them. And thank you, my brother, for reminding me of who needs to be touched at this stage. And some names immediately came to mind and how we might apply that pressure, so I thank you. That was like a prophetic word to me tonight, and I thank you for it.
It's 8:45, and we want to be mindful of your time and of all the cast and director, and thank you so much. I will say we're looking out over this congregation and seeing tonight a multi-faith gathering. We've got Unitarians and Baptists, and I don't really know who else, but I'm assuming somebody else as well. And the two of the congregations here, our congregation and Truly Missionary Baptists, are in conversation right now. We were invited to Truly because a member of their congregation was shot and killed by an off-duty police officer here, and that act of violence and all the surrounding complications in our city and our country around that have brought our congregations together in a way that we all hope will be positive and something that makes a change here in our community. And I can say for myself, and I think for everybody else here, that looking at the film tonight and knowing all of your stories is just tremendously inspiring. The courage that all of you have shown, the dedication is admirable, and the kind of thing that is really, you talked about a prophetic word, is a prophetic word to all of us here in trying to build exactly the kind of world that you're talking about. And so I offer my profound thanks to all of you, and I know on behalf of all those here. So we want to thank you all. Thank you.